little easier to see the screen if you do that.
Okay, we were school systems. So this is kind of the layout of how the UK school system works. There's primary education, secondary, and tertiary. They also are called like key stages. So primary, key stage 1. First half of secondary is 2, and then 3 and 4. And then we're gonna break it down.
So I had primary education. This is kind of split into nursery school and primary school, or like for us, like preschool and then like kindergarten and up. So generally they start around 3 to 5 years old for preschool, like similar to here. It's optional. It's not mandated, and because it's optional, there's not many of them. There's limited government funding for them. So yeah, as I said, at 5 they have to start kindergarten, or as they call it, year 1. Or in Northern Ireland, it's at age 4. And then primary school is age from 5 to 11. And that's subdivided into infant schools, as your like kindergarten, and then junior schools. It's also called first school. Yeah. So just some comparisons. The British school is very similar to the American school system for primary. One thing that's different is a lot of them wear uniforms, which I thought was interesting. And the teachers can vary, so like they don't just stay with one teacher for the whole day. Sometimes they split up in multiple different teachers. It's a little bit more rigorous. Starting at year 4, they just focus on more of the deeper subjects. It's a little bit similar. Americans is less formal and one teacher for the whole day, but both of them have emphasis on socialization skills, and it's like the foundation for the rest of their academic career.
So then there's secondary school, and that's ages 11 to 16, and from there it's called year 7 through year 11. So here is when we would be in middle school until like sophomore year, but they don't have middle school there. It's just called secondary, and you have to take basic subjects until you're age 14, like math, science, English, and all that.
Like your ordinary wizarding levels?
Basically, exactly. And like she said before, they typically wear uniforms, and instead of riding they don't have school buses, they just take public transportation. So there was talking about how you don't really want to travel around those school times because there'll be school children on public transportation a lot. They also have specialist schools, so like if you're really good at math and you're really good at arts, you'll do secondary school there. And then at age 16, you can decide between work and further education. But in between 14 and 16, you have to get your General Certificate of Secondary Education, and so they call it GCSEs. And that's at age 14. You can kind of factor in your own subjects. You start to pick more what you're interested in jobs. So you can pick more like technology or religion, stuff like that. And they take 2 years to complete, so it's from 14 to 16. And that's when you take them, is at the end of year 11. And they're increasingly important because now more and more people are deciding to do further education instead of leaving at age 16. Because at age 16, once you take your exams, you can choose whether you want to go out and work or continue education.
Yeah. So then, like she was saying, that you do have the option after secondary school of where you want to go for the most part, but a lot of people go to sixth form college, which would be like continuing the academic route, but you can also go more like vocational or like do job training and stuff. So yeah, sixth form would be when you're 16 to 18 years old, or year 12 and year 13. And it is free until you are 20. But yeah, in order to be able to get to that point, it's usually like a separate building back up, but in order to get to that point, you need to be able to like have the right GCSE scores. You can't just like let everybody in, so. And there are some sixth forms that continue like at secondary school, at your secondary school building, so that would kind of continue similarly with like the uniforms and things like that. But most of them, I got the impression that most of them are separate colleges, you're less likely to have uniforms, you know, they're bigger, they have more people, kind of similarly to like when we go to college, you just have like a bigger environment and greater like independence, so yeah. And then the big thing in sixth form is that you're preparing for your A-levels. And so you get to choose out of 70 subjects, you get to choose like 3 to 4 specific things that you want to study and that you're interested in, and then those subjects will be kind of preparation for university. So like you would need to take specific subjects and specific courses to be able to prepare to like study something specific in university. So they're a little bit like the SAT and ACT in that they prepare you for like that next level. But there are actually 2 levels. There's the A-level courses and the AS level courses. So like A-level courses would be like you take it for 2 years, you're sure you want to do it, but if you aren't quite sure, you can just do an AS level course in it, just take 1 year, and then decide if you want to continue with it or not. So yeah.
Perfect. So now jumping into the university, to give a little bit more background on what was going on there. From those tests, they're super important because a lot of the universities don't have general courses, so you kind of decide what you want to study right out of that 18 to 20-year-old year. Anyway, so I found some cool information about the funding of how they go on to this post-education. It's approximately £9,000 per academic year, which isn't terrible compared to a lot of universities that are here in the US. I mean, we're at BYU and we're super blessed to have super cheap tuition. But a lot of them, they end up dropping out because they can't afford it. I have a good friend that's from London that's studying here, and that's what she told me. She said a lot of her peers that she grew up with ended up dropping out because of funding issues. It's not as easy to get scholarships as it is here. A lot of them are either just paying by themselves or taking out loans through the government. But the downside about the government loans is that once you have them, they take a percentage of your salary away to repay it. So depending on what you study, if you're earning more money, then I don't know exactly the breakdown, but you may end up paying more than what you pay for school because of the breakdown of percentages. So that's a big downside. Anyway, we can go to the next slide. And so it's broken down into 4 different levels of university, and they give you these different certifications of the first year, and then those go on to various diplomas, and then level 6 is a bachelor degree equivalent of what we have, and that's approximately 3 or 4 years of schooling as well. And then something that was fairly common, it seemed like, was an integrated master's program that is level 7, and then it's typically a master's of science. Perfect. And then so something that I guess is kind of fun for them, not us because we're BYU, stone cold sober, we're not used to it, but so this individual that I called, she was like, yeah, one thing that's super crazy and super different from there to here is the drinking age is 18, here it's 21 obviously, and so they're going out to college and everyone can drink legally, and so when they go to orientation, it's called Freshers Week, and that's when everyone goes back to school in the fall. And I guess it's just this huge orientation party that everyone is drinking and who knows what else, going to nightclubs and bars and stuff. What's interesting about that though is that, I mean, 18 is just very young, and so they're going right into college and yeah, and partying different than we do. And so I think that's a different environment. When I Googled this, there was just like a lot of posts about like what to do if you don't drink, step-by-step process. I mean, so that was helpful, I guess. Anyway, so I guess that's not everybody, right? But the high majority of people are going out and enjoying themselves.
Yeah. So I thought I'd just kind of wrap up with some general differences between America and the UK. So teachers are, on average, are paid more in America, about a difference of $42,000 to $31,000. But the government pretty much always funds like all the supplies that teachers end up using, whereas in America, a lot of teachers end up paying for their own supplies, and like about an average of around $500 a year that they spend on that. So that's one difference. And then also we have a longer summer vacation by a lot. We have like the full summer, and they have more like 6 weeks normally, and especially in like college, for example, our sports teams in college are like kind of a big deal and they're very competitive. But in the UK, that's not such a like big competitive thing that gets as much funding. And also, there's this thing called a gap year, where after sixth form they have like the opportunity to just like take a year off from school, which is not so normal here. And I think that you probably would lose like scholarship abilities in America if you do that. So, and as people have mentioned many times before, we don't really wear uniforms unless we go to a private school. So yeah, that's school systems in UK versus America.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's get the language group up, and yeah, thanks for that. And I think you'll be mingling with a lot of people who are students at various ages and so on, it's helpful to have a sense of that, and also just to have in your mind a few of those basic things, like when you see a sign that says, such and such infant school. I think if you don't know how it's set up, it can be quite confusing. You're like, they're sending infants to school? Really? No. But you can also kind of thank your lucky stars that the tests that you have to take here are not quite as harsh as the ones they do.
Great looking.
I think it's generally speaking a lot more stressful to be a student in the UK.
All right, so we're presenting the differences between British and American English. And just a quick introduction, I'm Nathan McCory. I'm studying political science, and I'm a junior.
I'm Rachel, and I'm studying political science, and I'm a senior.
I'm Adam. I'm studying international relations, and I'm like a junior.
Yeah, junior-ish. I'm somewhere there too, like junior, senior-ish.
And these are all of our clans because we're all Scottish. I'm mostly English, but I've got lots of stuff.
All right, so just a quick outline of our presentation. We're going to talk about the historical background for why British and American English sounds different. We'll go through some accents and some different meanings in English between the two countries, and then the spelling, as well as just kind of like some general tips about the differences between them. So it's different in America and England because both have experienced a lot of change in their languages since the Revolutionary War. So in America, even before the Revolutionary War, most of the people who colonized were low class. They were fleeing religious persecution, they were looking for better economic opportunities, and so they had kind of a more rough, I guess, low-class dialect than the upper class in Britain. After independence, the English developed much differently in America over 250 years. And Americans wanted to be distinct from Britain. With their new independence, they wanted to sever a lot of ties that linked them back to their home country. And Britain did the same towards America. And one example of this is there was an event called the Dictionary Wars. So Noah Webster, an American, he led this movement to change the spelling of English in America. Whereas another famous lexicographer, is that what they call it?
Yeah.
I don't know, dictionary guy named
Worcester.
that's how you pronounce it. Yeah. Worcester, he wanted to retain the old English spelling that they use in England. And so Webster, he won the Dictionary War, and so that's why we spell it color instead of color. So he took out a lot of words, he took out a lot of letters to make things more efficient. He was like, why do we have all these extra vowels and consonants? So he just took it all out to make it much simpler. And so, fun fact, our modern pronunciation is more similar to 18th century British than modern British pronunciation. And I'll explain a little bit why that is later with how Britain develops. But here's some fun things about Noah Webster. So he wanted to change a lot of things like soup, machine, tongue, island. So basically he wanted to make everything spell as it sounded. So that's what it would have looked like if he got his way with everything.
I'm so glad it didn't work.
Yeah, so luckily we adopted a lot of this stuff, but not everything. A couple other things. So English also developed differently in America because of the influence of other cultures. So these are a couple of words we got from, for instance, from the Spanish: canyon, coyote, tornado. Germans brought different words. The French, Africans or African Americans, and Native Americans. All of these different cultures in this melting pot in America brought a lot of different vocabulary than they had in England. Also, local dialects developed in places in America that didn't have a lot of commerce or interactions with England. So while New Englanders, people on the East Coast, they sounded pretty similar to how people were sounding in England. Areas like the South and the West developed dialects that were much more distinct. And then lastly, here with the British development. So around the period of the Revolutionary War, the upper class British, they wanted to sound different than the lower class. They wanted to appear more distinct. So they started shifting from rhotic speech to a soft R. So that's what would have changed the word winter to winter. So just taking out the R noise. Eventually that became more mainstream. It spread from southern England, the big cities like London, throughout Britain. And that's why the British have a distinct accent, and that's why we sound different from them.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about accents. So I think here's a map of the British Isles, and the UK is about the size of Michigan. And if you think about in the United States, we have a lot of different accents. We have New England accent, and Southern accent, like Texan, if that's different, like. So I think it's cool that in such a small geographic area, they have so many different ways of speaking. So in my research on this, a lot of people have different opinions on what the main accents are. There isn't really a common consensus as far as I could tell of like, here are the accents, because it can depend on what village you're from. It says here that the way that you speak could suggest your age, your class, your background, and maybe your ethnicity even. And then just reading some message boards of people arguing back and forth about this. Somebody said that there are in fact at least thousands of identifiably different geographically based accents in England, many sitting on a continuum of gradual change together with step changes from one main accent area to the next. So they're just talking about England, but the principle is the same. You can have two villages that sound pretty similar but are slightly different. But then if you go if you contrast Scotland with like Wales or something like that, it's super far away, and so you can sort of see if there's a significant difference there. I thought this was a cool fact. This one person claimed that she could locate a lower middle class person to their individual town. Like it was so distinct to her that she could locate where somebody was from exactly. So that's kind of unique and pretty different from what we have in the US. So I also wanted to mention, these are just some pants that I put on here because of the words pants, but there's some words that will mean something slightly different in the UK than they do here. So these are things that we should avoid, like saying loudly in public, for example, because it might make us seem kind of crass or lewd. So one of those is fanny. That's an anatomical term. You can look that up on your own if you'd like, but don't say it. If you're trying to talk about a fanny pack, then say bum bag. Just don't use it.
Because that's classier.
Yeah, there it is. Also, pants. So in British English, that means underwear. I've made that mistake many times. I went to the UK a couple years ago and was casually throwing that around and getting a lot of weird looks. So say trousers, and then people won't be uncomfortable when you compliment their pants. So another word is quite. So here we use it as an intensifier, like it was quite hot, like it's very hot, but there quite can mean somewhat. So if you're saying I'm quite hungry, then it means you're kind of hungry. So that could be some cause for confusion. Also, they don't refer to their money as bills, they'll call them notes. And then biscuit. So what we think of as a biscuit, they would call a scone. And when they say biscuit, it's a cookie. That makes sense. It's very helpful.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Sure. So just some colloquial stuff. Quite, kind of already talked about it, like quite common, like that. The weather's quite nice today, like they say that a lot apparently. This is coming from a YouTube video, so reliability is somewhat questionable, but you sound like Brad, or what's his name, Radcliffe?
Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe, according to Nathan, so it's pretty reliable. Quid is slang for money, kind of like how Americans say like bucks. I noticed that when I went to London. Wicked, as heard in Harry Potter, means like good or awesome. Like, I don't know, there's a part of the movie I think that's like Ronald Weasley is like, wicked!
Yeah.
General tips. So, I've had just like general tips about accents. Sometimes it's hard to understand people, but just keep on trying to understand them. Don't freak out. So my parents sound very Australian, and so I've spent a lot of my life like translating for them sometimes. And there's one story from my family that we really like is when my mom went to the grocery store and she was checking out and she was trying to speak to the cashier and the cashier was trying to speak to her, and finally the cashier asked, like, "Do you speak English?" And my mom's like, "Yes!" So probably everyone speaks English unless they speak Welsh or some of the other languages. But yeah, so just keep trying at it. So they do spell things differently. There's a big list of all the words that they use U for instead of O, where we would just use O, as well as Z. So like they use SE instead of ZE in England. So, and there's a lot of other like smaller stuff that's different. Just the way they pronounce things too. Like they say Z instead of Z, stuff like that. Some more different, sometimes they don't drop the E, so like aging instead of AGEING. Sometimes they double L, and sometimes Americans double the L and the British don't. So you never really know. I'm pretty sure they won't grade our essays by British standards. So, but just something to be aware of. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you very much, guys. Okay. Thank you very much to both of those groups. That is useful information. I hope that it'll give you just a little bit more context so that you'll have a sense of the kind of experience that people are having in school. And I'm sure that you'll pick up lots of fun little Britishisms as we're over there. Yeah, I think, and I might give you a short list of a few other words to avoid. It is a short list. There are really only like half a dozen words that we use quite commonly that they think are a little bit more serious. So, you know, words like crap. That's a good one to avoid. I'll share this as a concluding story. Going to church in Wales, and there was a missionary, I think, from Japan who was serving there. And he was sharing his conversion story, and as part of that story he talked about how he'd been really interested in the gospel and taken quite a few opportunities to meet with the missionaries, and then kind of got a little bit hesitant or reluctant, and so he stopped keeping appointments and so on, and didn't see them for like 2 or 3 months, and then one day just ran into them in town. So he's telling this story, and he says, yeah, so then I come around the corner, and there are the missionaries right in front of me, and I just said, oh crap. And then he went right on with the story, but there were jaws dropping all through the congregation there in Cardiff. And in the priesthood meeting later in church, the missionaries weren't there. They discussed this at some length, actually. They were like, we need to talk to our missionaries about their language. And I was thinking, what's wrong with it? And honestly, I was befuddled. I was like, what did they say? And finally, you know, one of the guys that was there, you know, I was kind of, you know, looking perplexed or something. He's like, he said crap. I'm like, oh yeah, I heard that. That's no big deal. Well, it's a couple steps beyond the SH word for most British people. And so they were thinking, yeah. And there are a few words that you guys haven't even heard of that are like not cool words there. And so that's actually good to know, because in some ways being in a foreign country is almost like being a new kid in grade school. And you hear some kids say another word, a new word that's new to you, and you go home and say it and your parents are shocked. That's way too easy to have happen, actually. So you have to kind of keep your eye on a few of those that you might hear them on the street, but if you let them creep into your vocabulary, people are going to be appalled. So, yeah, and the last thing that I'll say, I promise, this is my second last. The F word is not as serious a thing there as it is here. So that's something that I'm not going to tell you have to adapt to, but you'll probably be happier if you can just tell yourself, you know what? When they drop an F-bomb, that's like me, saying crap. And when I say crap in the US, I'm not thinking anything much of it. And most of these British people, they're not thinking that they've just used the granddaddy of all dirty words. It's a very common word, especially among certain groups of people. Like anyone in like the 14 to 25 age group, or anyone that's working hard, So anyway, all right, that's enough for today. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.